Legendary footballer Pele, arguably the greatest player to ever grace the game, has died at the age of 82. He suffered from multiple organ failure due to colon cancer and was receiving end-of-life care at a Sao Paulo hospital before his passing. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has declared 3 days of national mourning. Nicknamed O Rei, which means the king in Portuguese, Pele enjoyed a highly successful career on the pitch. His captivating skill and exploits inspired millions of fans around the world. He notched up an astounding 1,281 goals in more than 1,300 appearances. Of those goals, 77 were for Brazil. He cemented himself into the annals of football history by becoming the only player to win the World Cup 3 times in 1958, 1962, and 1970. He retired a Brazilian hero and legend in 1977 after a 21-year career. The accolades continue to pile up even after his retirement. He was named FIFA's Player of the Century in 2000. Time magazine also included him in their list of the 100 most influential people of the 20th century. For more, we speak with veteran sports commentator John Dykes. John, his death comes just after the World Cup. It's a tournament that Pele won 3 times, so it makes it all the more poignant. But talk to us about his legacy. What made him so special?
Well, Avril, thanks very much for having me on. It's a very sad today because we've lost somebody who brought so much joy to the world. And that's what Pele was all about. I'll take you to the end of his playing career when he played a testimonial game to finish off his career and retire. And when he gave his post-match speech, you know what he talked about? He said, love is more important than anything you can take in life. And it was telling. Imagine a footballer today saying something like that. If I could be self-indulgent, one of the beauties of being a veteran presenter and sports expert is that you can actually remember seeing some of these guys. And my first memory of Pele was when I was 5 or 6 years old. My father called me across and said, drop your toys, come and watch this. And he was watching the 1970 World Cup in color for the first time. And he was just captivated by this dazzling Brazilian team that played a kind of football that I was growing up in Britain, had never, ever seen. Stunning goals, amazing skills. And at the heart of it all was this number 10, this guy called Pele, who was en route, of course, as you said, to his 3rd World Cup. And he was captivating. He was dazzling. He did things that no one had ever seen before. But you know, when he used his skills, it was to play what they called the beautiful game, a beautiful version of football. It wasn't done to humiliate anybody. Sure, he flummoxed his opposition, but what he did was all leading towards scoring incredible goals and playing quite beautiful, wonderful football. And Pele transcended football in the eyes of those who know a bit about the game. The great Hungarian Ferenc Puskás once said that he wouldn't rate Pele as a footballer because he was above that. Johan Cruyff said that he went beyond the boundaries of logic and what was possible. And that's why Pele was so very, very special. But you also have to remember, Avril, that he was a global superstar at a time when they didn't really exist. Because back then, we didn't have social media. We didn't have these endless debates about who the very best is. We didn't have any concept of personal branding. Yet this guy with the exotic name, just the 2 syllables, the 4 letters, with the flashing smile, he was so very, very special indeed.
You know, to your point about how he wasn't just a player in the beautiful game, he also had a beautiful personality. Talk to us about how that went on to shape the sport and inspire the generations that came after him.
Well, the thing about Pele is that he was around at a time when you didn't have the same kind of coverage of any sport, let alone football, even though it was the world's biggest game at the time. And the other thing about him is that because he tasted success so very, very young, winning his first World Cup when he was just 17 years old, the Brazilians knew that they had a treasure. And they actually made him a national treasure. They made him a monument, and they didn't let him leave the country. No matter how many times the giant European clubs tried to get hold of him, he didn't leave. He stayed with Santos until, of course, he went to North America. And the amazing thing about that was that because he was so tantalizingly elusive to so many of us, when we did get a chance to see him playing in World Cups or on tours by his club or anything like that, it was a very, very special thing. So he became this incredible global icon for the sport. And if you think about what he did in America, for example, long before David Beckham went over there and popularized the game, Pele went there with the Cosmos, and it was an incredible circus, if you will, when he was around. And he was paid so much money, he was so highly visible that he really developed the game. If you talk to people closer to home, for example, in India, back in the days when it was still really predominantly a cricketing nation, which it still is, but before football had gained much of a foothold there, Pele was the first iconic player that they knew. And then Pele, of course, beyond his career, went on to become an ambassador. You know, he worked as an ambassador for the United Nations. He set up foundations that were charitable. And everywhere he went, there was the smile and there was the message of love. And it was incredible to think that he touched so many people's lives and so many people wanted to be so close to him.
Yeah, and you know, he really brought football to the global stage. And I know that the focus is on Pele today, but I wanted to ask your thoughts as well on another great, the Argentine Maradona, who passed away 2 years ago. Why were these two players talked about in the same breath?
Well, they were talked about. I mean, Maradona came along and maybe was the next global icon. There were fantastic players all the way. I mentioned the really old school guys, you know, Puskás and Di Stefano and Johan Cruyff, who was an absolute wizard as a footballer. But it was only Maradona really with his exploits in the World Cup and what he did for Napoli as well as Argentina that really, again, transcended football because he became much more than just a footballer. He became symbolic of a nation. He became a cultural icon in Italy, in that part of Italy, as well as in Argentina. And it was fascinating. You'll see some footage of Pele and Maradona. You'll see it shared widely on social media today when Maradona was full of reverence for Pele because he showed such respect to him. And of course, such is the nature of football that it's tribal and people try to play up rivalries and try to pit Argentina against Brazil. But you never really had a problem with that because it was quite clear that Maradona did one thing and he did it absolutely beautifully, but Pele had done something completely different before that. If you actually go on, there has been a sort of a supercut clip that's been trending across all forms of social media recently called Pele Did It First. And what it's done, it's beautifully edited. It shows him performing tricks that we've grown to associate with some of the more modern day icons from Cruyff all the way through to Maradona, through to Messi and Ronaldo and Zidane. And it shows him doing it first and variations on it and certain skills and what have you. And of course, it plays slightly to this modern, you know, who's the GOAT thing, which is something I really dislike. That it's a very unquantifiable debate, but it's one that's driven by media and social media and the demand for engagement and polarizing opinions. But it's lovely because it just represents the skills that he had and what he was able to show as a footballer. So I think anyone who has an opportunity should go and look at Pele, look at clips of Pele, look at the goal he scored as they won that first World Cup when he was absolutely just 17 years old and first on the world stage, because Pele transcended. Pele was about love. Pele was about making people smile. And I think that's what people should do rather than debating, because there's literally too much hatred in football debate these days. And there was absolutely no hatred in anything to do with Pele's life.
He was a uniting figure. But, you know, do you think modern day footballers will be able to match his achievements, his love for the world, especially his humility and his charisma as well?
It's very difficult to say that, isn't it? Because there are different demands. You know, let's not, you know, kid ourselves. Of course, he was highly paid for what he did. He also had sponsorship and endorsement deals way before anyone else did, and he had, you know, deals with certain companies that meant that to try and get hold of Pele to speak would cost you a lot of money. But that was just a precursor to where we are today. He had people queuing up to sponsor him. He used network television in particular because that was the main global medium to his advantage to become this iconic figure. But he did it for good in so many ways. And, you know, I think it's very hard these days because there are so many commercial demands that we see, and we've just come from a World Cup in which we were constantly being asked to question players' endorsements and you know where they were politically. Well, I don't think there was ever any that question of that happening with Pele. I think politicians tried to get their hands on him because he was so visible and he was so iconic and he was a person with such global reach. But he seemed to transcend even that as well. I don't think there's any chance that anyone could ever have the impact in the way that Pele did in the modern game.
He has definitely left a mark. John, thank you so much for sharing your insights on the man, the legend. We've been speaking there with John Dykes, veteran sports commentator.